Have you ever noticed how certain phrases, seemingly harmless at first glance, might actually hide deeper psychological issues? Behind innocent-sounding words often lurk manipulative intentions, emotional immaturity, and a dangerous resistance towards personal development. When women overlook these verbal warning signs, they risk entering relationships that deplete their energy, cloud their judgment, and disconnect them from their inner strength. The renowned Swiss psychologist Carl Jung introduced us to the concept of the shadow unconscious, that hidden part of our psyche where we bury traits we deny in ourselves and often project onto others. In romantic connections, this shadow is precisely where toxic patterns establish their roots. That's why identifying these revealing phrases early is essential to prevent lasting emotional damage. In today's video, I'll reveal 5 dangerous phrases that, when spoken by a man, should immediately raise red flags. This isn't simply about avoiding surface-level conflict. It's about recognizing that beneath seemingly normal conversation sometimes lies a psychological power play that could cost you your emotional well-being and self-authority. As Seneca wisely observed, it's not that we have little time, but more that we waste much of it. And frequently, we waste precious time on individuals who don't deserve our emotional investment. So listen carefully, because each phrase I'll discuss carries profound psychological implications. Ignoring these warning signs might lead you into an emotionally draining relationship where you gradually lose your focus, self-worth, and most critically, your connection to your authentic self. And trust me, no woman who values herself, who has worked diligently for her inner peace and emotional discipline, should tolerate these dynamics in her relationships. Stay with me until the end, because beyond identifying these phrases, I'll show you how to respond with emotional intelligence, inner strength, and without compromising your center. Let's begin. First red flag: you have to accept me as I am. Initially, this might sound like genuine authenticity, perhaps even vulnerability. But be cautious. When a man uses this statement to justify harmful behavior, it becomes one of the most common and dangerous relationship red flags. Carl Jung taught that self-knowledge forms the foundation of all wisdom. However, he also emphasized that true growth begins when we stop making excuses and start integrating our shadow aspects. When someone hides behind "that's just how I am" to avoid personal development, you're not dealing with authenticity. You're facing someone who refuses to evolve. This phrase typically emerges after you have already noticed concerning patterns, perhaps emotional manipulation, responsibility avoidance, or passive-aggressive behaviors. The troubling part? When you attempt to discuss these issues, he positions himself as the victim or accuses you of trying to change his fundamental nature. Here's the truth. Accepting someone doesn't mean tolerating unacceptable behavior. Genuine authenticity isn't about remaining unchanged. It's about having the courage to grow. As Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic philosopher, wrote, "The perfection of character is to live each day as if it were your last, without laziness, without pretense." A conscious woman committed to her personal growth shouldn't shoulder the burden of a man who refuses his own development. Being in such a relationship resembles rowing a boat alone, while he won't even step aboard. Accepting this phrase without questioning dooms you to endless excuses, broken promises, and a dynamic where you perform all the emotional labor. Remember, Stoic philosophy teaches that our environment shapes our development. If your partner doesn't support your growth, they're actively hindering it. So when you hear this phrase, don't be deceived by its seemingly profound nature. Ask yourself, is he genuinely willing to look inward? Or is this sophisticated language merely an excuse to avoid change? Because if his words mask a persistent resistance to growth, denial of responsibility, and defensiveness toward improvement, you're witnessing a pattern that will only intensify over time. And that's where the situation becomes serious. Accepting that phrase is merely the beginning. What follows are other subtle yet destructive behaviours. You'll gradually find yourself trapped in a dynamic where you're constantly adjusting, sacrificing and creating space while he remains exactly the same. Protecting your peace isn't selfish. It's essential self-care. You aren't here to save anyone. You're here to share your life with someone equally committed to growth, who acknowledges their flaws and courageously works on them, just as you do daily. Someone unwilling to change not only halts their own development, but also impedes yours. Stay true to your values and maintain your integrity, even when your emotions urge you to remain, because what comes next requires even more vigilance. If you're finding value in understanding these psychological red flags, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. By liking this video, you help more women recognize these warning signs early. Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else recognize these patterns in their own relationship. And if you know someone who needs this information, please share this video with them. Now, let's continue with the second warning sign. Second red flag. All my exes were crazy, toxic. When a man makes this claim, it might initially sound like he's simply expressing frustration about past relationships. Don't be misled. These words conceal a much darker pattern, a clear indication of victimhood mentality, emotional immaturity, and psychological projection. Stoic philosophy teaches that authentic personal growth begins with honest self-reflection. Epictetus made this clear. It's not events that disturb us, but our interpretations of them. So when a man consistently blames his former partners for everything that went wrong, while never examining his own contributions to those conflicts, he's likely avoiding self-reflection. This is where depth psychology becomes relevant. Jung taught that what remains unconscious eventually controls us from the shadows. Men who speak negatively about all their previous partners are often projecting their own unresolved issues. This phrase reveals a dangerous mindset, that of the chronic victim. Individuals who perpetuate this narrative rarely take responsibility for their actions. Instead, they recycle blame, dramatize past events, and unconsciously expect you to become the exceptional partner who won't disappoint them. But remember, no one escapes their shadow unless they willingly confront it. The essential question becomes, is it truly possible that all his former partners were problematic? Or might there be a pattern he refuses to acknowledge? A self-aware woman who knows her worth and has learned not to betray herself must seriously consider this question. Jung said, "What we deny submits us." Entering a relationship with someone who doesn't recognize their emotional responsibility resembles building a house on shifting sand. Regardless of how diligently you work to create a healthy dynamic, he'll continue acting out the same unconscious script. And the worst aspect? Eventually, the narrative he shares about his exes will become your story too. Because someone who needs to play the victim will always find a new person to blame. Such a relationship is like rowing a boat with a leak. No matter how much love you invest, it will continually sink. This is where emotional discipline becomes crucial. Look beyond the words. Ask yourself, has he ever discussed his own mistakes in previous relationships? Or does his narrative exclusively focus on what others did to him? If he's never accepted responsibility before, why would that change now? Remember, it's not your role to be anyone's therapist. You aren't here to repair broken men who refuse healing. You're here to share your journey with someone who walks beside you, not someone who drags you into their unresolved past. Third red flag. If you really loved me, you'd do what I ask. This represents one of the most subtle yet damaging forms of emotional manipulation. At first impression, it might seem like a heartfelt request, a genuine expression of needs. but examining more closely reveals manipulative pressure, using your affection as a control mechanism. Stoic philosophy holds that authentic love cannot be forced, it must be freely chosen. Love should be founded on freedom, mutual admiration and respect, not guilt or coercion. Epictetus stated, "No one can enslave you emotionally unless you permit it." And this phrase is precisely designed to transform affection into a control tool. Jung also addressed this dynamic in terms of power imbalance. In his studies on the shadow self, he noted how unbalanced relationships often begin when one person projects their insecurity and control needs behind a mask of love. Phrases like this exemplify such projections. When a man makes this statement, he's establishing an invisible boundary that conditions your affection. He's essentially saying, only by fulfilling my demands do you prove your love. That isn't love, it's disguised emotional blackmail. An emotionally mature woman must clearly distinguish between a healthy request and a disguised demand. Yielding to such phrases might temporarily seem like an act of love, but gradually you sacrifice parts of yourself, your authenticity, boundaries, and personal autonomy. The danger increases as demands escalate. What begins as a love test evolves into emotional subjugation until you're no longer certain whether you're acting from love or fear of abandonment. Such communication patterns don't strengthen relationships, they systematically destroy them. If you find yourself in conversations where someone makes you feel guilty for establishing boundaries, protecting your time, expressing your voice, or maintaining your perspective, pause and reflect. You're dealing with someone who confuses love with possession. You aren't here to please others at the expense of your authentic self. You're here to build relationships where you can flourish, express yourself freely, and exist without conditions. When a man says, "If you really loved me, you'd do what I ask," he's not merely questioning your feelings, he's challenging your autonomy. This phrase doesn't seek understanding or connection. It seeks control, attempting to override your will through guilt and erase your personal boundaries. If this video is helping you recognize these manipulation tactics, please take a second to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Your engagement helps our community grow and allows more women to recognize these patterns before getting trapped. Drop a comment below. If you've experienced any of these red flags, your insight might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. And if you know someone who would benefit from this knowledge, sharing this video could be your way of helping them avoid a toxic relationship. Now let's continue with our next warning sign, fourth red flag. You're not enough for me. Hearing these words from someone claiming to love you can be devastating. This phrase doesn't merely hurt, it attempts to dismantle your self-worth at its foundation. It's not simple criticism. It's a direct assault on your identity, value, and essence. Jung explained that many individuals project their inner dissatisfaction onto others. This phrase represents pure projection. When a man tells you you're insufficient, he's not actually describing you. He's revealing his own emptiness, distorted expectations, and constant need for dominance. He's attempting to diminish you so you'll become dependent on his validation. Stoic philosophy reminds us that our true worth doesn't depend on others' judgments, but on our virtue, actions, and inner coherence. Marcus Aurelius stated clearly, "Do not let another man's soul rule over yours." Yet that's precisely what this phrase attempts, to control you through insecurity. Someone who compares, belittles, or suggests you're inadequate is trying to make you work harder, not from love, but to earn their approval. In this game, you'll inevitably lose, because the standards continuously shift. Today, you're insufficient for one reason, tomorrow for another, until eventually you're exhausted, questioning certainties you once held. A conscious woman doesn't beg for affection or feel compelled to prove her worth. You aren't here to conform to someone else's ever-changing expectations. You're here to share your life with someone who values you authentically and inspires growth, not self-doubt. If you ever hear this phrase, pause, breathe deeply, and remember your identity. Don't believe you must become more for someone who fails to recognize everything you already are. That insecurity belongs to him, not you. As Jung observed, you cannot make someone see your light if they are only searching for shadows. Any Stoic would affirm that your peace holds greater value than any attempt to fit someone else's mold. External validation is fleeting, unstable, and often self-serving. True confidence emerges when a woman learns self-validation, trusts her intuition, and lives according to her own values. There is no greater mistake than allowing someone, especially a man who weaponizes your insecurities, to define your worth. When he claims you're not enough, he's projecting his own emptiness, inflated ego, and control needs. This phrase doesn't seek truth. It attempts to subject your mind and self-esteem to constant judgment that will always be unfair. Jung explained that what remains unconscious becomes our fate. If you don't recognize these comments early, you risk becoming trapped in a relationship where you're constantly proving your worth, forgetting yourself in the process. The Stoics taught that no external opinion holds power unless you grant permission. If a man insists on making you feel inadequate, the wisest response isn't staying to prove him wrong. It's walking away with dignity and resolve. Not from pride, but self-respect. Emotional discipline means refusing to let empty words destroy what you have worked hard to build, your confidence, clarity, and freedom. As Seneca said, the greatest power is self-mastery. That mastery begins when you decide to reject emotional crumbs disguised as constructive feedback. Fifth red flag, do whatever you want, said with passive-aggressive tone. If a man says this with irony, coldness, or resentment, he's not offering freedom. He's setting an emotional trap, attempting to make you feel guilty for making independent decisions. He's not relinquishing control, but disguising manipulation as permission. Jung spoke about hidden manipulation tactics emerging from the shadow self. This phrase perfectly exemplifies such behavior. The speaker isn't expressing genuine feelings or thoughts, but expects you to interpret them. When you don't, consequences follow: guilt, drama, or reproach. Stoic philosophy teaches that healthy relationships require clear, direct communication. Seneca summarized perfectly: speak so that your words don't require interpretation. When someone communicates in riddles with double meanings, they're not engaging in dialogue, they're manipulating emotions. Such phrases create perpetual uncertainty. You find yourself constantly interpreting, pleasing, and avoiding negative reactions until you realize you're living according to their emotions rather than your own. Gradually, your peace of mind erodes. A woman with developed emotional intelligence should never participate in such games. The best response to do whatever you want is literal action. Do exactly that without fear, unnecessary explanations, or falling into their emotional web. This single act breaks the manipulation cycle and forces the other person to either mature, communicate directly, or remain alone in their passive-aggressive silence because you're no longer available for emotional games. Both Jung and the Stoics agree that living with clarity and authenticity creates true freedom, that freedom begins when you stop reacting and start choosing your words, boundaries, and who deserves your energy. Responding clearly or walking away from ambiguous conversations isn't cold. It demonstrates emotional intelligence, breaking the manipulative cycle and establishing clear boundaries. The Stoic approach to these situations is straightforward yet powerful. Don't decode what someone lacks courage to express directly. Ambiguity serves as a control tool, and a conscious woman like a Stoic individual, will always choose clarity, consistency, and inner freedom. Remain true to your decisions. Act with conviction, and remember, a man who genuinely wants your company doesn't need manipulation, coded language, or emotional confusion. Healthy love doesn't hide behind games, it appears with transparency. Inner peace develops when your thoughts, words, and actions harmonize. As we've seen throughout this video, phrases that might initially seem harmless often represent clear warning signs. If not recognized promptly, these signs can lead you into relationships that drain your energy, focus, and essential self. Stoic philosophy and Jung's depth psychology invite us to look beyond words, to recognize patterns, not just moments, protecting our emotional stability with wisdom. Because ultimately, it's not about judging others. It's about honoring yourself enough to recognize when someone's words reveal a future that doesn't align with the peace and growth you deserve. Remember, sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from relationships that don't support your highest self. You deserve connections that uplift rather than diminish you, that inspire rather than control you, and that honor rather than manipulate your authentic nature.